What are you doing?
Nothing.
What are you doing?
Just sitting here being quietly ashamed of myself. So, a normal Saturday night.
I want you to question everything, especially after this episode. Welcome to VCR, a vintage cinema rewind. We're bringing old movies to new viewers. I'm Blake.
This movie sucks.
I hate you. Damn it, I hate you.
No, all right. I'm going to walk it back. This movie doesn't suck. Me and this movie, when you've got two friends who you both really like, and then you introduce them and they really don't get along.
Yeah.
That's really what's going on here.
I'm really good friends with this movie, and you two, are just not jiving.
Yeah, we're just really, the vibe is just really off between us. We're just going to be giving each other the side eye all night.
Yeah, this hurts me just as much as introducing two friends who don't like each other.
No, you know what, though? This is going to be fun because you and I do disagree on movies, but we usually mildly disagree, right?
Yeah.
Where it's you think a movie's a 10, whereas I think it's a 6, right?
Yeah.
I think this is probably going to be the most we've ever really disagreed on something.
I think so as well, because we're doing Aguirre, The Wrath of God from 1972. Werner Herzog's masterpiece.
Werner Herzog's masterpiece?
Yeah.
Okay.
Werner Herzog's goddamn masterpiece.
Yeah.
Which you have no respect for, and it's crushing my soul.
Sorry, buddy. I'm breaking your heart.
If you haven't seen this movie yet, go back and check out the spoiler-free discussion in the primer episode where we break this movie down. It's a really interesting film. In my opinion, it absolutely deserves your time. In Michael's opinion, maybe not quite the same. But we talk about it in a lot more detail, so go check it out there. What I'll say before we get started is I want to plug that we've got the draft episode coming up in few episodes from now. Really excited about it. I picked, I got drafted the franchise films, so I'm picking 3 movies of that. You've got 6 seasons in a movie.
6 seasons in a movie.
I don't know if you thought about how you're going to structure that in the draft.
I will say, I think you're going to like what I show up with.
I'm quite excited about it.
I think I made a good call.
And then Jason's got actor or actress to stick 3 movies together. So We'll see what we've all got. But let's dive into Aguirre, the detailed, spoiler-full discussion. Let's start in front of the camera and work our way back. What I will say getting into this is I think that the effects and filming of this film are really kind of interspersed with what's going on screen as it is off screen. So I think we're going to be crossing between those two pretty quickly.
You know what?
Yep.
I was thinking earlier that I would almost like to see a documentary on the making of this movie, but upon reflection, I don't think that's necessary because this movie is almost its own making of documentary.
It really is. I love it. I love the idea behind this because essentially what happened is they filmed with no budget on location in the Peruvian Amazon, down the Amazon River, and
Werner Herzog, if the guy hadn't been a filmmaker, he would have been a cult leader because he just convinced all these people to risk their lives for his movie.
And basically, they just kind of reacted to what was happening around them and filmed it.
Yeah.
It's kind of incredible. It's like guerrilla filmmaking almost.
Essentially, yeah.
So
I mean, in and of itself, even though I didn't have the greatest viewing experience, I really have to admire just the sheer mad laddiness of this whole endeavor.
The audacity of this film.
It's almost like the Spanish conquistadors are searching for this fabled lost city of gold, and so it's a doomed expedition, all these men chasing a daydream, and then here comes Werner Herzog making all these innocent people do the same fucking thing for his movie.
Yeah.
Except the only difference is his worked, and presumably no one died in the process.
No, but some people were injured.
Oh, yeah. So Klaus Kinski, the guy who plays Aguirre, who, again, as I mentioned in our last episode, wasn't fucking acting. I guess he fired a gun at some extras one day and shot the tip of some guy's finger off.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was crazy. We have to talk about the pandemonium of this movie alongside this movie because just as chaotic as it was filming is what it was being on set. They were essentially filming what they were doing at any given time.
I think there's a quote where Werner Herzog basically admitted that they would literally come up what they were going to do next 10 minutes before they actually did it.
Yeah. And what I'll admit is that it shows in the dialogue.
Yeah, the dialogue, especially in the first act, is very clunky.
Yeah. And that's what I would say is probably the weaker aspect of this film, but it's not
I
something that detracted from my
I will
enjoyment.
say the dialogue gets better as the movie goes on,
Yep.
but especially there's some moments in the first 30 minutes where I was just like, what the hell am I listening to? Did
Right.
nobody like was there no writer like was there no screenwriter in spitting distance of this screenplay?
Right.
But there are some great lines later in the movie.
Yeah.
It's just at the beginning it's very kind of like
It's stilted.
it's hammy.
Yeah.
It's awkward.
Yeah, it's somewhat awkward. Like I said to Jess, I kind of wished I watched it in German, but as the film went on, I connected with it much more. It kind of, I don't know, it just clicked for me. It just, my brain just started processing it at the level that it was at, and it was all flowing.
It's a classic sink or swim situation.
Yeah.
Like you swam and I sank.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, and again, there are some good lines later on, like when Guzman is being crowned emperor and he's objecting to his throne, and
Right.
Aguirre says, like, what's a throne but some planks and some velvet?
Yeah,
Like,
and that's actually a quote taken directly from Napoleon, apparently.
oh, really?
Yeah.
All right. Pretty cool.
Yeah. There's a lot of neat stuff to talk about in this film. I want to start because we kind of talked about it in the primer episode. I want to start with the opening shot because it is one of the most beautiful and memorable opening scenes of a movie that we've watched this year, I think. The
Sure.
opening scene of the conquistadors and the slaves hiking down the mountain, this beautiful heavenly music is playing. Like, the greens are greener than you could ever imagine.
They're
like,
so green.
yeah, it's just like, for if you love nature like this, it feels like you're there in the Amazon forest. And like they were filming as deep into the Amazon forest as anybody else. Like it was pretty wild to hear some of the stories of them being there.
Yeah. We shouldn't, like, romanticize problematic behavior in Hollywood, especially not where Kinski is concerned. But, like, again, just the sheer balls to the wallness of, like, I'm surprised no one died filming this movie.
Yeah.
It was insane.
Yeah.
There's a scene later in the movie where there's a boat up in a tree.
Right.
And, like, this was pre-CG. They had to somehow get a freaking boat up a tree.
Right.
Just for a couple shots.
Was it a mirage though?
Yeah, exactly. So I can only imagine Werner Herzog being like, "Oh, come on, guys, it'll look great. Just get it up there."
Yeah. Smooth talking German.
Yeah, exactly.
You have to be on board with the atmospheric tone of the film. Like the music, like for you don't always listen to the music. Like it's not usually a big factor for you. But for me, like that was incredible. Like the biggest comparison, the most recent comparison to this is the film Dune Part 1. Like
Sure.
it's a very atmospheric film and it doesn't necessarily always care as much about the plot in that first.
You know, there's this YouTuber I like. His name's Patrick H. Willems,
Mhm.
and he did a video recently. Well, I don't know how recent, about vibe movies.
Yep.
Movies where, like, it's not so much about the plot or the character; it's just about the vibe.
Right.
And I was kind of thinking about that video essay as I was watching this movie. Is
Yeah.
that, yeah, I mean, there's Aguirre and there's Guzman and there's the other people, but this is, like I said in the last episode, this is more of a vibe than a.
Yeah.
This is more about the vibes than it is about a coherent narrative. Like, actually, in his review, Roger Ebert pointed. I'm bringing up Roger Ebert again because I'm a film school scumbag. But in his review of this movie, he pointed out that a lot of deaths actually happen off screen.
Right.
And I thought about that. I'm like, yeah, that's right. Like,
Yep.
you just kind of have to fill in the gaps yourself.
Yeah, and that doesn't always work for everybody, and it doesn't always work for me, but in this case, I found it really did. What I'll also say,
Good for you.
what I'll also say is that, like, it's not about characters developing at all. Like, the characters are who the characters are throughout the film, and they don't really change or get better or learn any lessons. They all just die.
Yeah, I mean, really, Aguirre is only the protagonist in the sense that he's the most unhinged and the most power mad.
Yeah.
So he's just driving people to keep going and not turn back. But I mean, the whole thesis of the movie is all about, you know, man versus nature. So it's almost kind of like any kind of action you can take as a human is kind of meaningless before just the oppressive power of nature.
Well, and it's also like how greed and unchecked greed.
How unchecked greed leads to ruin.
Yeah, like, you know, like They could have turned back at any point in time. They could have said, you know what, like this.
Fuck this.
Yeah, like they were given the option by Pizarro in the opening scenes. He said, you know, like this doesn't feel like a fruitful endeavor, but you know what? We'll give it our one last shot. Go check things out down the river. And if you don't find anything, let's just turn back because this is clearly not going the way we intended it to go.
Yeah.
And Aguirre is just so
he's so
fixated.
He's so Klaus Kinski about everything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He's just so fixated on it that it doesn't matter who it is or what it is, nothing is going to stand between him and fame and fortune.
Right.
And that's something
so he'd be an influencer in the 21st century.
Yeah. There's just something like it's a very like primal idea that just worked for me on so many levels.
Primal is a good word for it.
Mm-hmm.
Primal is a good word for it. And I mean, Klinsky, and I mean, Aguirre himself, like he's the most prominent character in the movie, but even he isn't really a fully fleshed out person. We don't really know his motivations. He has a daughter.
I think his motivations is I'm crazier than a shithouse rat and I want fame and fortune.
There's a great YouTube compilation where it just shows Klaus Kinski like being a dickhead in a bunch of different situations, and the title is something like Klaus Kinski waking up and choosing violence for like 19 minutes or whatever. So it's almost like this alternate title for this movie could be Aguirre waking up and choosing violence every single day.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, you know, he's even got this daughter who he's bringing along on a voyage. Right. And there's a couple moments where we see him being nice to her, but like really like, you know, you're just watching this guy in terror the whole time.
Yeah. And terrorizing everyone around him.
Yeah. Even a horse at one point.
Well, the horse was... Oh, yeah, I guess he did kick the horse and stuff, but the horse was sent away by Guzman.
Yeah, which was dumb.
Yeah.
So everyone...
But everybody chose the stupidest option all throughout the movie.
If you like movies where people just get stupider as the movie goes on...
But here's the thing, is that, like, the main people who are who are making all the decisions... Everybody else is like, this is stupid. Why are we doing this? Like,
but they do it.
But they do it because they have to listen to the chain of command. It all comes back to that, like, that structure of civilization, right? Like, the slave, the probably one of the more articulate characters in the film, Okello, he's very articulate. He, like, at one point he says, you know, like, I was born a prince and now I'm this, like, no-name slave and I'm stuck here with you idiots, basically.
He has one of the great... So he has one of the great lines of dialogue in the movie where he says, like, I was born a prince and, like, men weren't allowed to look me in the eye. And now here I am in chains with you people.
Yeah.
So...
And it's, like, it's so interesting because, again, like, there's always, like, something contemporary going on with these, like, very primal ideas. Like, this human nature... It's always relevant, right? And so looking at this and looking at these characters who have absolutely no say in their lives kind of thing, it's always like going to reflect back to something.
What did Loki say in the Avengers? That it's the unspoken truth of humanity that you crave subjugation?
This is why you and I have such different opinions on this film. You just brought up Marvel and Loki.
Well, it was a relevant quote. You dick. We both liked the Avengers. Come on. Anyways, I will say... Even though I wasn't too keen on this movie, there is one scene that I really liked, and I'm going to bring it up right now. There's a moment when they spy two indigenous people coming down the river on a canoe, and they pull them into the boat.
And they're like the indigenous people like, you know, not bearing arms.
No, they're just totally minding their own business. And
they've come to, like, reason and talk with these people.
Yeah.
Barter with them.
Right, and they start... The indigenous man is wearing, like, a gold necklace. So they're like, oh, my God, it's obviously proof that El Dorado is nearby. And they have to translate through the slave. And then the priest comes in and he holds up the Bible. And he's like, he starts going like, oh, did you know that, like, you know, this is the word of God. It speaks the truth. And then he hands it to them. And the confused indigenous man holds it up to his ear and then drops it. And they're like, kill them for their blasphemy. And they both get murdered on the spot.
Because he says something like, this book doesn't not speak.
Yeah. And they both get murdered for their blasphemy. And it is darkly funny, just showing how, like, from these indigenous people's perspectives, these conquistadors are completely delusional. They're completely making no fucking sense.
Yeah.
So I will say, even though I wasn't crazy about this movie, that scene really popped for me.
Yeah, and you actually bring up a good point, because not only this movie is like darkly funny, it's a whole vibe, there are points that like will absolutely disgust you.
Oh yeah.
And like there are certain scenes where you're just like you almost just can't believe like how
stupid
and
well,
like depraved human beings can be.
There's that great scene where the horse is annoying Guzman, the emperor, so he has him like thrown off the raft.
Right.
And one of the other characters literally says, "We could have survived on that meat for a week." Like, what is he doing?
Yeah. Yeah, like it's just every decision made by the people at the top is the wrong and most short-sighted decision possible. And for Aguirre, there's something like deeply sinister about all of the decisions he's making, because all of them serve his own purposes. Like, when he makes Guzman the leader instead of himself, it's very obvious that he's essentially basically trying to make him the scapegoat for everybody's problems, right?
Yeah.
He's somebody who would rather lead from the shadows, I think.
Yeah, he's essentially installed Guzman as like a puppet government kind of thing.
Exactly.
Because the guy is like weak-willed and easy to manipulate.
Yeah, and like, we see later in the film he's completely like gluttonous, like he just consumes while everybody else is starving. Like that's one of my favorite scenes as well, is when he's sitting there just mowing down on everything, and there are people literally counting like grains of rice.
Corn. Yeah,
grains of corn.
Yeah.
And everybody's kind of staring at him. And
then he gets distracted and they all just start eating from his
right.
plate.
Yeah. That's one of the great scenes. And then, he's not long for this world at that point in time, which we can all see.
And that's another death that happens off screen.
Mm-hmm.
He just shows up dead.
Yeah. Well, what I want to backtrack a little bit, and again, we're going to talk effects and filming along with like the in front of the camera, is I want to talk about the rafts. Just like when they begin the journey down the Amazon River. Like this was one of the first times where I really said to Jess, I was like, because my mind was blown at this point, because I was like, oh my God, they are actually on these rickety rafts floating down the Amazon River. And B, everybody is actually on these rafts, like cameramen and all, and they're just filming this. And then we get to spots where like the water it's not smooth sailing. Like they're in like rapids at points in times, like on these little rafts.
There's a scene where like one of the boats is like, it looks like they've hit
it's
shallow.
like a whirlpool kind of thing.
Yeah, and you just see it from a distance, and Aguirre just shrugs and leaves them into their fate. And I was watching it kind of like, I think those people are dead. Like legit, I think those people
and
are
they were
dead.
Never seen from again.
Yeah. So I mean, it's very, in terms of just sheer filmmaking, it's very. I feel like I was building to something, but it's gone now.
Well, it's again like that's that auteur style of documentarian filmmaking that Werner Herzog eventually becomes known for. Like every time we see a shot, it's based on the perspective of the characters that we're following. So like, when those people are struggling on that raft, we never really are on that raft with them. And it feels like they're doomed from the get-go, essentially, because we're filming them from afar, like we're seeing them from a distance.
Yeah,
like,
I mean, everyone's doomed from the get-go.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So, I mean...
like Aguirre even overthrows and then kills and plots against people at all points in the film as well. Like the conquistador, what's his name again? Don Pedro.
Yeah, the guy he stabs.
Yeah, he goes pretty mutiny pretty quick on him.
I will say though, there's a scene where like they find Don Pedro's blood on a rock, and it is the most garish red I've ever seen. It looks like they spilled a bucket of like red paint from Spirit Halloween on the rock. Just I don't mean to be churlish about it, but I was just like, okay, that's blood, I guess.
You nitpick this movie to death.
Yeah, like I said, and I'm gonna reiterate it. Like, it's not that this is a bad movie. It just really wasn't a Michael movie.
Yeah.
Really wasn't a Michael movie.
This was really a Blake movie. And also a Jess movie, as it turns out, which we'll talk about later.
I'm surprised.
Yeah. What I'll say about the vibe of this movie as well is I think it does a pretty good job of having this weird nervous energy throughout. Like I just felt weirdly nervous the whole time.
I felt sweaty during this
Yeah.
whole movie.
Like there's this
Yeah.
kind of very unique type of suspense that is in this film.
This movie also has a very jarring pace to it.
Yeah.
Like because it's sort of shot like a documentary, there'll be moments where there's kind of these abrupt cuts where you're just like, what? Like, oh, I guess we're here now, right?
Right.
And at first I found that very jarring and very distancing, and I continued to find it throughout the whole movie. But most people would probably get used to it.
Yeah, I definitely grew into this movie a lot.
Mhm.
And so that was something that I really appreciated. Like the film style of this movie just blew me away. Like I said, this movie is the sum of its parts, and all of the parts really connected with me to make a very enjoyable watching experience.
Good for you. Again. Good for you.
Well, let's talk about some of the comedy later on in the film, because like you said, when your brain clicks and you're like, no, this movie is actually like darkly and
It's kind of
very-
funny.
and
Yeah.
subtly funny. You have to realize that it's funny to understand the humor in it.
I'm trying to think back to when I realized that the movie was a comedy.
Mhm.
It was probably when Guzman gets crowned emperor.
Right.
That's when I was probably like, all right,
Yeah.
okay. Like, there was never like a laugh out loud moment for me, but there was a kind of like a subtle kind of, it's almost like a very British sense of humor where you're just sneering at these people, right?
Whereas, which funny because Jess and I, like by the end of this movie, were laughing out loud.
Okay.
So for example, like some parts that we were laughing at, and this is all again, it's kind of relating to like just how ridiculous things get, like how completely like off the rails this expedition
How things
goes.
just keep getting worse and worse and worse and worse.
Yeah, and so it's almost like dreamlike because, what these people actually say and do these things, but like, you're in this feverish fog with all of them, it feels like. And so, there's a line. The first time I think Jess and I laughed out loud was when they decided to raid one of the villages that was along the Amazon River. And they run up to shore, and the one guy gets shot by an arrow, and he looks at it, and he's like, I thought that would hurt more. And then he just dies.
Yeah. Yeah, that was pretty good. That was pretty good.
And then another part that really got me, again, this is moving into the latter half of the film when everybody's sick on the ship, and Okello, the slave, is lying beside the cannon, and he's like, and so they think that there's a mirage of a ship, like, on top of these trees. And he says, that is no ship, that is no forest. And then, like, this arrow just hits him in the leg, and it's, like, so nonchalant. Like, he doesn't even flinch when the arrow pierces his leg. Yeah, he looks down, he's like, this is no arrow.
Yeah.
And then that's when Aguirre, like, comes out of, like, nowhere, and he's like, no, that is a real arrow. And he, like, rips the cannon and shoots the cannon beside him. And Okello is just more irritated that the guy's like blasted this cannon off beside him.
He's
more than
disturbing
anything.
his calm. Yeah. I will say there is the one moment that made me really laugh was when Don Pedro's wife kind of comes up to Aguirre and basically says like, blah blah blah, you're a monster or whatever. And then she walks away, and he just immediately turns and looks at the horse, and he's just like, bah! And he just sort of like just antagonizes the horse.
And it's really interesting. Like
that, I will say that was one of those moments where I'm like, I can't tell if I should be like laughing or terrorized,
right,
or both at the same time.
Yeah. And you brought up Don Pedro's wife. Inez is a really interesting character in this because she's really the only character who seems at all points in time more or less sane.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Like
her husband seemed pretty even keeled, but then he spent most of the movie in a coma.
Yeah.
And then they hung him. So
but yeah, so like, she sticks up for her husband, she tries to keep him alive. That's one of the really cool scenes of this film, and one of the parts that I did laugh out loud when Guzman denies Aguirre the satisfaction of Don Pedro's death. And they go to trial, and he's like, you've been convicted, but I will spare you.
I'll give you clemency because it's like some Spanish anniversary of something. Yeah.
Right. And like, I laughed out loud at that scene because I was like, got him kind of thing. But, at the back of my mind, I'm like, oh, Aguirre is not going to like that. But like, she's just, she's so even keeled. And then it's really like, Shakespearean tragedy that she just wanders into the forest later on in the film. Like once she's finally had enough of these people, and that's a really poignant actually moment of the film for me, and probably one of the most poignant moments of the film is she just wanders into the forest to die.
She's like Beatrice in Hamlet.
Yeah.
You know what? Just jumping back for a second, I think the other moment that kind of made me laugh out loud was the fucking flute player.
Yes.
They're just like, bring in the flute player, and he's just, it's
yeah,
like
he's got like this like weird instrument where it's like 12 flutes kind of taped together, and he's like playing it. It's really cool. It's really catchy, actually.
Sure, yeah. But it's just this old man with this flute, and it's just, he's just jamming out this whole time.
Yeah.
So.
I had a blast with him.
Okay, I will say that it's funny how I kind of came here today ready to like, you know, like I said, I was ready to have a cage match with you, but it's not that I think this movie's bad or that I don't think it's well made. It just, again, it really wasn't for me.
Yeah.
So,
and I'm glad that you can admit that. Like,
yeah, like it's this movie for me anyway. It's almost more interesting to talk about than it is to actually experience.
Right.
I didn't have a good time digesting it, as you might say, but I can talk about it afterwards. Be like, well, okay, and you know what? I'm just gonna throw my cards on the table. I found this movie, my own personal experience was I found this movie pretty boring.
Yeah, and so what I'll say about that is that it almost feels like this film doesn't have
like a conventional 3-act structure or like a
or
like even a satisfying ending.
No, I loved the ending.
Okay.
What's
the monkeys?
It doesn't have like a central conflict to it. Like it doesn't. Okay, well it does, but like
I
don't think the conflict's gonna land for everybody.
I think the conflict is very much man versus nature.
Yeah,
and also man versus man. Like these people,
but there's no like. It's not like here's a bad example, like a completely bad example, but I'm just going to put it here. The movie 2012, there's a very central conflict where the nature is being like, we're going to kill all of humanity.
Right.
And it's like humans trying to survive that, where it's like
Woody Harrelson and his pickles.
Yeah. And it's like, you know, in this movie, it's like these people are just making the dumbest decisions possible. And
it's like all nature has to do is wait.
Yeah.
All nature has to do is wait.
Literally it.
These
like,
we're going to get them eventually.
Yeah, exactly. It's not like, you know, it's not like the movie Twister where it's man versus like these crazy.
There's no moment where it's like a drive-in movie theater and like the Twister appears behind Jack Nicholson's head or
yeah,
anything.
like stuff like that, you know, like you have to be interested in a dark and brooding movie that's more interested in the nature of the philosophical questions that it's asking.
It's kind of like The Thing, but with no monster.
Yeah, again, there's just like no big pressure point other than the stupidity of each person and them interacting with each other.
And there's no like clear-cut like good guy, bad guy. There's just Aguirre, who's the world's craziest man.
Yeah. Played by the world's craziest man.
Right, leading the world's stupidest expedition.
Yeah, and that's a big thing. Like if you're not into a vibe kind of movie, this movie is going to bounce so hard off of you.
I can attest to that.
Yeah.
Yes.
I wanted to talk one other comedic moment that
okay.
I thought of while we took a break there. When he overhears the men planning on escaping and he goes and cuts the guy's head off, that's another moment where Jess and I burst out laughing because he cuts his head off so quickly that he finishes his sentence while his head is like dislocated from his body.
Yeah, that's how I want to die, by the way. Just catch me totally by surprise. You'll be like, Michael, what do you want for dinner? I'll be like, I want pad thai. And then I'll wake up in heaven like, wow.
Yeah, I like, again, it's one of those moments that I just laugh out loud funny for me because I wasn't expecting the head to continue talking.
Yeah.
I knew that he was not long for this world, but it's just like one of those absurdist moments. Like this film has a surprising amount of absurd moments to it that work for me.
Even the ending with all the monkeys was kind of like, okay, I guess this is happening now.
Which, let's talk about the ending a little bit. Like, I want to hear your thoughts on the ending because it doesn't sound like you loved it.
I didn't hate the ending. This is one of those movies where it's like, I admired and respected I understood what it was doing and what it was trying to say. I was kind of checked out.
Yeah.
Right? It just wasn't working for me. So the ending, like, I liked Aguirre's final speech. Actually, I pulled it up. I'm going to read part of it.
Cool.
So Aguirre is, everybody's dead except him. There's all these monkeys, and he basically says, when we reach the sea, we'll build a bigger boat, and with it we'll sail north and take Trinidad away from the Spanish crown. From there, we'll go on and take Mexico from Cortez. What a great betrayal that will be. We will then take control of all of New Spain, and we will stage history as others stage plays. I, the wrath of God, will marry my own daughter, and with her found the purest dynasty ever known to man. Together we will rule the whole of the continent. I am the wrath of God. Who else is with me? And he's this crazy blonde man in the middle of the jungle.
Surrounded by monkeys.
Surrounded by monkeys. Like, I have to admit, even, again, I have to give this movie credit. That's a great way to end this story.
Yeah.
Just surrounded by monkeys.
He's the only person left. He's the only one in the group left alive. And he's just rambling like these insane, like, you know, if he was in a position of power, like if he was, you know, in the Spanish high courts and he was rambling this, like, you would be a little bit scared, right? Because it's like this man who's in a very powerful position who is obviously insane. But in this particular environment, he is absolutely nothing, and all of these crazy ramblings mean absolutely nothing. And that's what's such a great ending of this film.
This whole movie, you're like, this guy can't possibly get more insane. And then he does.
Yeah. The character arc is, Aguirre is crazy.
Yeah.
Let's get into some effects and filming discussion. Werner Herzog wrote this script in 2.5 days.
Yeah.
He filmed it using a stolen 35mm camera, which is fantastic.
Of course he did. Like, Herzog was pretty deranged himself.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So, like, what's really interesting about this is, like, he actually used that camera on several of his first films. And he basically just said, you know, like, I stole it, but it's not really a crime because I was meant to hold this camera and wield this camera, essentially.
Look, I didn't steal it. I was meant to have your car.
Yeah. It's kind of incredible. So he wrote this, and he wrote it while he was touring with, like, a very unknown soccer team by the sounds of it, and one of the other players on his soccer team actually threw up on his original script, and so he just threw it out the window and restarted.
Yep.
He's like, I don't even remember how the original script ended. I just restarted, basically.
So just the whole spirit of madness was
Yeah.
imbued in this project from the beginning.
Well, and even to get Klaus Kinski on board on this, like, Klaus was actually an actor at this point, and the reason why he was thought of for the role is because he stayed with Werner Herzog's family in their apartment building earlier in Herzog's life, and he just remembered Klaus Kinski being absolutely insane, being an absolute lunatic while living with them. So he was like, he is the perfect person to play this character.
So let that be a lesson to you kids. Just be a complete dickhead, and maybe someday a famous director, one of your friends will turn out to be a famous director and will cast you in something.
Yeah, well, and what's really incredible about it too is he sent him the script, and then he got a call at like 2 a.m. and he's like, it took me about 5 minutes to realize that the incoherent screaming through the phone was Klaus Kinski, and he screamed for an hour, and he was like, I think he likes the script.
I think he likes it. That's pretty cool.
So they actually, and so this is where the dialogue comes into play here, is this is a German-Mexican collaboration.
Sure
it
is.
was all shot in English, but it was dubbed over later, and so you can kind of see like the dubbing.
I was watching this movie. Actually, I watched part of this movie with my mom, and like I was watching the lips. Yeah. And I was just kind of like, is this dubbed or not? I can't really tell.
It's like, it's very close to not like
yeah,
and especially in the latter half of the film, like your brain kind of just switches off, kind of.
You just kind of adapt to it.
Yeah,
it's like an old spaghetti western.
Exactly. And so that was actually the only language that all of the cast and crew were able to communicate together.
English?
Yeah, so that's why they filmed it in English, and then they actually dubbed it into German in the first iteration of this film, and then made it into English later.
Huh.
And
fun.
Yeah. And
how quaint.
Klaus Kinski, or sorry, why do I keep calling him Klaus Kinski? Klaus Kinski didn't do his own voice work because he wanted too much money to do it afterwards.
Well,
So
I think I heard that like a third of this movie's budget just went directly
it did,
to him. Yeah.
because he was the only one known at this point in time.
Yeah, Hollywood has a long and rich history of rewarding bad people.
Yes, and this is one of them.
Yeah.
There, like you said previously, he wasn't really acting. He was just absolutely insane. But however, here's the interesting part of his performance.
What's that?
Werner Herzog and Klaus had very different opinions on what the character should be portrayed as.
Sure.
Klaus thought that the character should be loud and obnoxious and constantly just screaming at people.
Right.
Whereas Herzog wanted like a much more subdued kind of crazy.
Like a quiet crazy.
Yeah. So
a
what
simmering crazy.
Exactly. So what he would do is he would film them and just get them absolutely riled up and like screaming at people. And then what he would do is he filmed the parts of him just burnt out mad, and that's what we saw in the film.
Wow, look at that.
So
Herzog knew how to handle his stars.
Yeah. Oh, and he knew, like, him and Klaus worked on so many films together that like he knew how to handle Klaus.
Well, I guess after Klaus died, he released a documentary called My Best Fiend.
Mm-hmm.
I actually had seen part of that documentary before going into this movie, and about how like they were best friends, but also wanted. There's some kind of, I don't know if this is true, but there's some story about like Herzog driving over to Kinski's place to murder him. There's another story about like. There's another story about Herzog pulling a gun on Kinski on the set of this movie, demanding that he not walk off set.
Right.
And like, there's different versions of that story about what's true or what's not true. It's like, needless to say, it's it probably wasn't a great relationship. But
one of my favorite things about all of that, as a quick side note, is that Klaus said later that he was the only one with the gun.
Yeah,
on set.
I heard that
so
too.
Dark.
Yeah. I was the one with the gun. So yeah, I mean. Holy Moses, right? Like, yeah. So,
and we kind of talked about this previously. We alluded to this, that, you know, it really feels like we're just like watching them there. Like, there's not a lot of separation between what's being lived and what's being filmed.
Right.
And they really did kind of base that, like, those ideas and what they were experiencing, and they really involved that into the filmmaking. Like, for example, that journey down the river, like I said, is exactly what they did. The scene where they wake up and all of their stuff is gone because it's rained so hard that the river has risen like 30 feet or something like that.
Yeah.
That actually happened.
Yep.
Like, they actually woke up one morning and half of their stuff was just gone because they had been rained out and the river had risen so much. Like, when they're sailing down the river, and at one point, you know, like when Guzman talks about all this land that he has, and Aguirre says to him, like, yeah, but point me to the land that'll actually hold your weight right now, because it's all been
all flooded.
It's all flooded. Like, that was actually true. Like, the whole area was completely flooded over.
And you gotta admire the cojones on these people that instead of running for safety, they just kept filming. They just rolled with it.
Like I said, this is like guerrilla filmmaking.
Yeah. GORILLA filmmaking.
Yeah, 100%.
I hope I spelled that correctly. I am a professional writer.
Yeah. Oh yeah, and you talked as well about, like, you know, how much of a menace Klaus was on set, like him actually shooting off somebody's finger. He also almost killed somebody with his sword. Like, he smashed them over their helmet with the sword, and it was so hard that it would have killed him if you hadn't been wearing it.
Absolute mad lad. And you know what? Like, we shouldn't, like... I'm not saying that as, like... We shouldn't romanticize men like Kinski. Like, he was a genuinely terrible person.
Yeah, one of the most despicable human beings in filmmaking history.
So, yeah, I mean, I'm not saying that as, like... You know, I'm like, oh, what a mad lad. I'm like, no, this guy was a complete prick.
Yeah.
So, let it be known, we are not fans on Vintage Cinema Rewind.
Yeah, I very much agree. Although I'm definitely going to be watching more of his movies, because sometimes the art and the artist you have to separate.
I guess so. I mean, it's kind of like, it's almost like Kinski was this rabid dog, and Herzog was one of the few people who could leash him long enough to get him to actually behave himself.
Yeah. And even then, like, was he behaving himself?
No, that's a misnomer.
Yeah, and just, like, there's so many other chaotic aspects to the filming of this movie. Like, for example, the monkeys Werner Herzog only paid half of what he was supposed to buy all those monkeys. And so the guys who sold him the monkeys were just going to cut and run. And he basically, and this all was taking place in Florida, actually. And so what Herzog did was he actually pretended on the runway to pretend that he was a veterinarian. And he said that the monkeys didn't have their vaccination documents. So they couldn't be flown out. And so instead he took the monkeys that way by, again, stealing them.
But Herzog was like, I was meant to have these monkeys.
Yeah, and then he just released them into the wild after. So
those monkeys are probably all dead.
Well, I mean, yes, because it's also 50 years ago.
Right. Well, I mean, you can't take an animal that was raised in captivity.
No, I don't think they were raised in captivity. I think they were captured.
Oh, okay. Well, then maybe Herzog was being a real G about it.
They were going to be sold into captivity, I think, and then he managed to steal them away.
And then send them back. Okay, well,
yeah.
Somebody make a documentary about that.
Yeah. And,
Herzog's monkeys.
In terms of, like, you know, the sickness that everybody had on set, like, people are legitimately very sick.
Oh,
you know, all the fevers and everything. Like, nobody died of malaria, thank God. But
it is a miracle no one died filming this
You've
movie.
said that multiple times now.
Yeah.
And
I keep
really
saying
can't
it more
that.
emphatically each time.
Yeah. I mean, for example, like, Werner Herzog himself actually got stung, he says, about 150 times by fire ants while he was chopping down a tree with a machete.
You know, I remember Roger Ebert had this tweet like 13 years ago where he said something like, Chuck Norris is going to die in bed and Werner Herzog is going to die parachuting into a volcano.
You know what? I think Werner Herzog and Tom Cruise should make a movie together. That might be the craziest movie ever
why
made.
not, right? Yeah, because
just two men pushing the limit.
Two men who they're just willing to do anything for their art. Yeah. Jesus.
That's what we need right there. That's the collaboration made in hell.
Yeah, I guess so. The infernal duo.
What we should talk about next is the historical accuracy of this film.
Right. Or lack thereof.
Pretty mixed, actually.
Okay.
Did you do much research into this?
I just read that it was Herzog kind of played fast and loose with history.
So he played fast and loose, and he has admitted to that. However, a lot of what he put in this film, like the bigger ideas of this film, actually happened at that point in time.
Oh,
like,
really?
Pedro and Lupe de Aguirre are real people, or were real people, who were sent in 1560 to search for El Dorado. They had 300 Spaniards and hundreds of slaves with them at that point.
And it was one of those things where, like, they were never heard from again, and Herzog was just kind of like, I'll make a movie about that.
Oh, this is the story of these guys is almost crazier than the film itself.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
So Aguirre actually ended up overthrowing Don Pedro, as he did in the film, and had him killed. He murdered pretty much everybody that stood in his way over the next, I don't know, year or so. And they reached the Atlantic Ocean, killed all the natives on the way as well, because why not when you're Aguirre?
I guess not.
They took over an island that was controlled by, I believe, the Spaniards. And then the Spaniards said, hey, all of you soldiers of Aguirre, let's make a deal. We'll give you all, wipe your slate clean if you decide to drop what you're doing and come back to Spain. And they were like, yep, sold. And so Aguirre was pretty horribly punished and murdered at this point.
Wow.
But, you know, his daughter died during this trip.
Just like in the movie.
Yeah, like a lot of this stuff kind of mirrors what happened there. And he actually, there were other expeditions previous to this on the search for El Dorado that mirror a lot of the aspects of this film as well.
This movie does a good job showing just the sheer stupidity and the sheer brutality of, like, the European colonials.
Yeah.
At this point in history. Like, it's just bleh. Like, it's just, it's gross and it's awful.
Yeah, and it, like I said, this film can be at times laugh out loud funny, but there were times where I was, like, pretty sickened by what I was watching, because I knew that there was a lot of elements of truth to what was happening.
Yeah, yeah. I like to think that the real Aguirre and Klaus Kinski are in hell right now, strangling each other.
Probably. Yeah, he was even more evil than we saw him portrayed on screen.
Wow,
like, he was an absolute dirtbag.
I don't know whether to laugh or to cry that reality was worse than this movie.
Yeah.
Ugh.
Oh, what I was gonna say earlier as well, because there was a few times where I said that, like, this is real. This is happening. Do you remember when they showed like that mummified?
Oh, the
Inca
corpses?
person?
Yeah, I
those
did.
were real corpses. I
Yeah.
guarantee you that. I couldn't find anything online, but those are real.
I remember watching that part and just being like, those are dead people.
Yeah.
Like, ugh.
Yeah, like there's some pretty unsettling things in this film as well.
Yeah, and that does kind of lend to the like brutal, stark realism of this movie.
Yeah.
Where you're just like, oh my goodness.
There's one other thing I was gonna say too on that note, but it's slipped out of my mind again. Let's talk score, because I thought this score was absolutely incredible.
Okay.
Did you notice it?
No.
Oh God.
Sorry.
This is why you didn't connect to this movie. You just
it wasn't a zither. What can I say?
it was so good. It's performed by Popol Vuh, which is a German progressive krautrock band. And their name actually comes from a Mayan word. I can't remember what it was exactly, but like they're very much kind of, you know, rooted in these kind of ideas of the South American music kind of thing. So they actually created their own special instrument to make a lot of that.
Interesting.
Yeah, it was like a specialized organ, basically.
Huh.
Like I said, it's absolutely incredible. Like I said, I think this is one of the highlights of the movie, for me in particular, because of, you know, like it immediately gripped me. Like like that opening shot, like I said, the music of it, like immediately gripped me, and then it stayed throughout the film, and I thought, you know, it's a vibe movie, and it really fit the vibes of the film.
Okay.
And it's considered one of like the greatest scores of all time as well.
Really? Man, I must be like half deaf in one ear, but I did not notice the score at all.
Yeah, it, like I said, completely popped for me. Really,
Okay.
really worked. In terms of the legacy, like this movie obviously has a massive cult following. It's considered one of the greatest films of all time.
That's right.
You've already brought up Roger Ebert. It's on his great films list.
I'm sure it is.
Yep.
So was Last Temptation of Christ.
Yep, that's true. It's a great point. But it's got a really deep and rich legacy. There's so many films and filmmakers who were inspired by this. I was actually listening to Bill Hader talking about this film earlier
I
today.
saw that clip too. Yeah.
Yeah.
Bill Hader's a big cinephile and
yeah.
a pretty good director, as it turns out.
Yeah. I know you were, watching the rest of.
Barry.
Yeah. I thought that was kind of relevant to other conversations that we had on past episodes, so I thought that was really cool that he went in depth about it.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, Apocalypse Now is one of the greatest films objectively of all time. Like, that's in my top 10 list. What do you think about Apocalypse Now? Very, very briefly.
It's probably in my top 10 too. Well, I can't really say that because I haven't seen it in like 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
But we should do that on the podcast sometime.
Oh, I guarantee we will.
Yeah.
Maybe next year.
Maybe next year.
Yeah, I think that's a good epic to do at some point, like maybe in the Oscars slot.
I saw something today that kind of made a good summary of this movie, where it's like this, like Aguirre is Apocalypse Now if Kurtz was the main character.
Yeah,
like
I said that in the first episode.
Oh, did you? Maybe that's where I heard it from. No, I'm listening. Maybe I am deaf in one ear, but yeah. You know what? I almost wish I liked this movie more than I did, but It just, like I said, it's when you're two friends who you both really like just don't get along for whatever reason.
So what's really interesting is this movie has something like a 90% rating on Rotten Tomatoes or something like that.
Sure.
And so that means that this clicked for 9 out of 10 critics is how that.
So like, in
is.
those like old toothpaste commercials where it's like 9 out of 10 dentists recommend blah blah blah. I'm the one dentist.
You're the 10th
like,
dentist.
I'm like, I don't know, man.
That's exactly where I was going with this. You are the 10th dentist.
Yeah.
That this doesn't connect to, because let's get into our personal reviews and the partner factor, and I'll start. I was completely hooked in this movie. Like, this movie hooked me in the first scene. Jess was interested in this. We both watched it together.
I am genuinely stunned that Jess was.
Yeah, she was laughing
this.
around. She was like, "This movie is really funny." Like,
okay.
And she didn't comment that until about halfway through, because I think again, like, it didn't quite click with her at first that it was like a comedy.
It's a comedy, yeah.
But we both got really into it. And like, she was a little distracted at the beginning, but then fully, like, let
committed,
the movie, fully committed to the film. I love the unique style of this film, of being just dropped into 1560 in the Amazon and feeling like I'm there with the conquistadors. Like, it's weird because, like, there's like a weird attachment almost with them. Like, it feels like I'm there, but also like I'm just like a silent spectator as well. Like the camera and the way that it's shot doesn't really like
Doesn't really welcome you in.
no, and it doesn't try to make you empathize with the characters at all or anything like that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Or try to tell their side of the story. It's just like these people are insane. Let's watch.
Yeah, and there's no, like I said, the editing, it's a very jarring pace where like suddenly it's like a bunch of people die off screen. Like there's no like dramatic last stands or dramatic slow-mos, or like the music never swells. It's just kind of like, yeah, you're just kind of like, wow, look at these assholes.
Yeah, it feels real. Like there's an element of realness to it that you're not going to shake off while watching this film. And some of the parts are more surreal than others, and like there's, like I said, there's almost like fever dream elements to it, and like those parts come off as really funny because they are, but they work because they're just like here and there so jarring, and they feel like good timing, like comedic timing. Like they feel like they fit into the insanity of how far things have gone, like
how much things have descended or come apart.
Yeah, exactly. And so like this movie just comes together from so many angles for me that like I'm interested to see where this fits in the long term and how this holds up to multiple watches. But for me, like this is probably one of the best movies that I've watched this year.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Like I think that this is going to be up there at the end of the year for me for movies that we've done on this podcast.
Well, Blake, nobody's perfect.
All right. Now tear me
into-
apart with your review.
I think you already know, I've done a pretty good job banning about. I just didn't click with this movie. I didn't have a good time with it.
You were the 10th doctor or dentist.
I was the 10th doctor, the 10th dentist. So, and look, I've done a good job like backpedaling and like explaining my perspective, but like this just wasn't a Michael movie. I can't say I had a good time with it. I watched it alone with no partner. So I just, you know what? Maybe if I'd watched it with a partner and like there was someone else in the room laughing, I might have clicked into it a little more, but I was just kind of like, what the fuck is this? So
you know what? And that says something about the experience of films as well. Like some films really, the atmosphere in which you watch it is really important, right?
Well, and also I will say tentatively, I respect that this movie is willing to polarize people.
Yeah.
This movie is willing to just be like, like some of you are going to really like this, some of you really aren't.
I think that's like a perfect description of this film. Like I think you either are going to love it or hate it, and I don't think there's going to be a lot of in between.
Yeah. So actually these two podcast episodes should really give you everything you need to know. Like you're either going to be a Blake on this movie or you're going to be a Michael on this movie.
Yeah.
We're
gonna have to watch another movie that you absolutely love and I really don't connect with, because I think that what's really interesting about this discourse that you and I have between this movie is that it starts to really paint a picture of what you and I are interested in films and what really appeals to each of us.
I think part of it is I'm more interested in stuff like plot and character.
Yeah.
I'm not as interested in like the vibes.
Yeah.
When I was in film school and like a little younger, yeah, I could just get behind the vibes, but now I'm more like, all right, what's going on? Like,
Right.
I'm more interested in, I guess, like the story mechanics than like the cinematic mechanics.
Right.
Whereas maybe you're more interested in the cinematic mechanics than you are the story mechanics.
I think that I'm more open to letting a film's strengths play to their strengths. Like I think that I'm more willing to look past the negatives in a film if it's swinging for what it wants to swing for and it succeeds in that element.
So you can admire the swing a little more.
Yeah, I can admire something being bold and something succeeding in being bold, even though not all elements of it particularly hold up. Because, like I said, the dialogue, like it's not perfect by any means. It's not
Shakespearean, no.
But like on that note, I still enjoyed it for what it was because everything else was just firing on all cylinders, and like I just was like, yeah, the dialogue's not great, but everything else is awesome.
Everything else is pretty
matter?
cool. And you know what? Maybe if I'd watched this on different circumstances, on a different night, when I was in a different mood with a different person, like maybe if you and I had watched this together, we would have had a really good time.
Yeah,
but
because you know what? That's the other thing too, is Jess and I talked throughout this movie, and that is something that I very rarely do, but it's something that I do sometimes with documentaries.
Yeah, and it's funny. I did mention that I watched the first act at home with my mommy, and it is kind of funny. Like her and I, we're both kind of laughing at the movie and making fun of it as
Yeah.
it was going on. Like we were kind of roasting it.
Yeah.
So, and maybe at the time I was like, wow, this movie's so fucking bad. But maybe looking back, maybe the movie was kind of like winking at me this whole time.
Right.
And maybe I was just too lunkheaded to get that.
Yeah.
So, you know what? Before our like year-end 2023 list, I might have to watch it again.
Yeah.
Although that said, despite all that, I think I'm being remarkably charitable to a movie I genuinely had a bad time with.
And you know what? I'm pleasantly surprised by how jovial you're being about all of this.
Yeah.
Because I was really worried you were gonna get on this.
I'm pulling a lot of punches right now.
Yeah.
Just to be like, and again. It's like I said, I've probably said this 2 or 3 times already. I don't like this movie, but let's examine that sentence. Michael Grant Segan, first of my name, do not like this movie. That doesn't mean it's a bad movie. It just means it wasn't a Michael Segan movie.
Yeah. And I can completely be fine with that. Like if you came in here and you were like,
this movie sucks.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I would have been much more upset, but
You would have like body slammed me through this table.
Yeah, I literally would have flipped this table, I think.
Onto me. Yeah, probably.
Aguirre style.
Right. And then none of our listeners would have ever heard from me again.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
But no, I can completely appreciate this. This movie is one of those movies that isn't going to connect with everyone, but I think when it does connect with you and the other person that you're watching with, you guys are going to have an absolute blast. The other, you know what? I'm going to actually bring Bill Hader into this conversation one more time because all of this has kind of reminded me of my experience of Hot Rod, the film Hot Rod.
You are bringing up the weirdest comparisons.
The first time I watched Hot Rod, I was told that it was a really funny movie that I had to see it. And I watched it by myself, alone, just one random school night as a kid.
Okay. And you didn't have a good time?
Didn't have a good time. I didn't laugh at one joke. I was like, this is stupid. I watched the movie the next day with my best friend. And him and I talked through the movie, laughed at parts, like made dumb jokes while we were watching it, had an absolute blast. And now I have very fond memories of that movie. And I would say that Hot Rod is objectively a pretty good comedy.
Maybe that's the caveat here is that you watched this with your partner. I watched it alone.
Yeah.
And like in some ways, movies aren't meant to be experienced alone, are they?
No.
Like a book you're supposed to read by yourself unless you have kids, I guess. But like, I guess a movie, you're generally supposed to watch it with other people. So maybe that's the kicker.
What an interesting parallel to this movie as well, in that like Aguirre is on this island where he himself is the man of his own domain, right? And him being, you know, the crazy person by himself on his own island is the tragedy of this film, right?
Oh my God, the real Aguirre. The real tragedy of this movie is looking in the mirror and realizing that you are Aguirre. All right, let's end the episode.
All right, see you all next time.
Bye-bye.